fills in gaps in previous histories and provides an updated story for Iowa's changing population. Now, the story of the state's too complex for me to go into today. Literally, the book's 125,000 words. To read it to you would take like 20 hours. So I'm not going to subject that to you. My poor spouse had to live this book for 9 years. They don't need to live for 20 hours. So I'm going to highlight 3 individuals that you probably don't know about, who helped build the Iowa we know of today. The first of these is this guy with this great mustache, Samuel H. Byers, who was a soldier in the Civil War and escaped from 3 Confederate POW camps. The second person is Judith Ellen Foster, one of the first female lawyers in the state, and an important temperance measure. The third person is James B. Morris, a veteran of World War I who published the state's most important black newspaper, The Bystander, for decades. They all shared a deep desire to leave Iowa and their country a better place, fighting to save the Union, battling against the evils of alcohol consumption, and leading the fight for equal rights for African Americans in the early and mid-20th century. All of them also happen to be lawyers. There's tons of lawyers' jokes, but these are folks whose goal was to make the world a better place. So I'm going to read you a paragraph from the chapter on the Civil War, which tells you, it's from a memoir of the war, not Byers, but somebody else. But it talks about ideals and institutions, and how those are more important than individuals. The people we'll talk about here truly believed in making the world a better place. Individual I'm going to talk about here is Seymour Dwight Thompson. He joined Iowa's 3rd Regiment, and he explained the motivations of the volunteers who joined to fight for the Union. His unit included men from almost every state and many countries. Most of them were from rural areas. They all knew hard outdoor work. All were motivated by the goal of preserving the country. Each man loved the Union for what it was to him. Thompson wrote. For the Irishman, America was an asylum that allowed him to escape religious oppression and find liberty that had been denied at home. German immigrants also fought for liberty and saw in the rebellion a reactionary movement against democracy. The rebellion represented aristocracy and injustice. The Union had to survive so that democratic institutions could endure. Men joined the Northern Army to save the nation from disintegration. They volunteered to overthrow all traitors and bring them to a swift punishment. The country, he wrote, was too dear an inheritance to be easily given up. So that summarizes some of what the 3 characters will talk about here. So Samuel H. Byers was the first man to join the 5th Iowa Infantry. He proudly recalled this in his memoir, which you can find online. It's a wonderful read. You can read it in a couple hours. He volunteered at the age of 22. He joined a regiment in July 1861. He was from Oskaloosa, and he had just passed the Iowa bar exam. He survived 4 years of combat and imprisonment. In 1861, the 5th Iowa was sent to Missouri, like many Iowans. Missouri was neither north nor south. She was simply hell, he wrote. A place where neighbors killed each other and burned homes. Irregular and roaming bands of villains rode everywhere, and nothing seemed too awful or too cruel. The 5th Iowa fought in Tennessee at the bloody Battle of Iowa, losing almost half of its men in just a few hours. Byers also took part in the campaign to capture Vicksburg. Of course, what's in blue was Union, gray, states that had slavery. Not every state with slavery left. Kentucky State, Missouri State, West Virginia, well, broke off in Virginia, Delaware and Maryland State. His book is over here in the left, With Fire and Sword. Wonderful, great source. In 1863, Vicksburg was the most important remaining southern fortress on the Mississippi River. 30 Iowa regiments and artillery batteries took part in the long campaign to take the city. It took 6 months of hard fighting to finally surround and besiege it. On May 16, 1863, Byers fought the Battle of Champions Hill. His regiment advanced and paused 100 yards from their opponents. We halted, stood still, and for over an hour we loaded our guns and killed each other as fast as we could. He fired his musket 40 times. Shot through the hand, he remembered the wound did not hurt. I was too excited. He fired back through smoke at an enemy he could not see. I wondered that a man on either side was left alive. Once the battle ended, Byers realized that magnolia trees were in bloom. He remembered their beautiful blossoms contrasted with the horrible scene of battle. At the Battle of Chattanooga, over in western Tennessee, about 6 months later, Byers was taken prisoner. He spent 15 months in southern prisons or trying to escape from them. He was sent to Macon, Georgia. He acquired a Confederate uniform by trading tobacco for it, one piece at a time. Then he put the uniform on and walked out the front gate of the prison. Escaped his pursuers and hopped on a freight train. He ended up in Atlanta. Sherman's army was outside the city. He slept in barns and spent days wandering about Atlanta, gathering information on rebel positions. He was captured a mile from Union lines, arrested as a spy. Documents that might have led to his execution were lost, blown away in the wind. And he was taken to another POW camp in Columbia, South Carolina. He escaped from there. Where he was kept was simply an open field with guards and no cover. He and another man survived in the woods, having gotten away, receiving help from enslaved people. They were finally caught by a Confederate patrol searching for deserters and sent to another prison in Charleston. He escaped from that one as Sherman's army approached. He joined Sherman's staff for the last couple of months. After the war, he wrote histories and memoirs, such as his, which came out, I think, 1911, maybe 1905. And he served as U.S. consul to Switzerland, so essentially ambassador, for 15 years. His Song of Iowa became the state's official song in 1911. Samuel Hawkins Marshall Byers died in 1933 in Los Angeles. Second person in the story, get this right, is Judith Ellen Foster. So picture her on the right, one of Iowa's first female lawyers. And at one point, one of probably the most prominent women in the state. Everybody knows about Prohibition in the 1920s, the result of a constitutional amendment. But you probably don't know how important the temperance movement, the anti-alcohol crusade, was in Iowa. Prohibition in Iowa was a hugely important issue for decades. With such a messy and complex history, I'm almost afraid to even mention the subject for someone trying to ask me to summarize it. Temperance gave women an important role. Think the Women's Christian Temperance Union. An important member of the temperance fight in Iowa, as well as nationally, was Judith Ellen Foster, one of the first female lawyers in Iowa. She was born in 1840 in Massachusetts. She'd been raised by religious parents. Her father was an abolitionist who quit the Methodist Church because it wasn't anti-slavery enough. She taught school and devoted herself to missionary work among the poor. In Chicago, she met E.C. Foster, a lawyer who she married in 1869. They moved to Clinton, Iowa, that year. She studied law, was admitted to the bar in 1872. Aiding her husband, in trial cases. She's the fourth woman to practice before the Iowa Supreme Court. Clinton was a rough river town, full of men who worked in the lumber business that dominated the area. Iowa had officially prohibited the manufacture and sale of alcohol in 1855. But by the 1870s, the law wasn't really enforced, and towns set their own rules. Heavy drinking was not unusual, encouraged by hard work and easy access to liquor. Now, alcoholism could have devastating consequences for women and children dependent on men. Given Foster's religious background and her history of work with the poor, it was no surprise she became involved in the crusade against drunkenness. She gave one of her first anti-liquor lectures in June 1874. A local paper said it was one of the best temperance lectures we ever listened to. She was effective and eloquent, equal to anyone in the country, the paper. Her words were earnest, truthful, burning, and eloquent. Her legal training made her a clear and forceful speaker. Her success was a threat to liquor sellers who were not used to being challenged. She was such a threat, her house was destroyed by an arsonist in 1875. Her family lost everything, but neither her husband, or their two kids were hurt. Local newspapers blamed saloon-keepers who despised those who try to close their shops. Her statewide reputation only grew. She was elected the corresponding secretary of the state's Women's Christian Temperance Union in 1874, and spent the next few years organizing local branches across the state. She devoted her life to the Prohibition cause and helped lead the push for a constitutional amendment in Iowa to ban alcohol. She gave hundreds of temperance speeches across the state and the nation. One historian wrote she was the most prominent woman in Iowa in the 1880s. After her husband moved to Washington, D.C. to work for the Treasury, she was appointed to a variety of government positions. These included serving as a sanitary inspector during the Spanish-American War, where she investigated and reported on health conditions in military barracks. She was a representative for the United States at the International Red Cross Convention in Russia. She was appointed by Teddy Roosevelt to a committee that studied the working condition of women and children across the country. She also was a special agent of the Department of Justice in 1901. She inspected the condition of women inmates in state and federal prisons. She died in 1910. One speaker said her name was inseparably associated with reform in all parts of our life. She toiled in the temperance cause with unflagging interest in that great movement for a higher civilization. Third person in our story here is James B. Morris, who was a lawyer, journalist, a veteran, someone who saw the rebirth of the KKK in the 1920s and published the most important black newspaper in Iowa, and helped found the NAACP in the state. Last person here is Morris. He lived far into the 20th century. He was an influential journalist and lawyer. He grew up in Atlanta, and he watched a close friend lynched when he was a boy. He was born in 1890. At 12 years old, he worked in a print shop and fell in love with journalism. He went to Hampton University in Virginia and earned a law degree from Howard University before coming to Iowa in mid-1960. He passed the Iowa bar exam 8 days before he joined the U.S. Army. During World War I, Iowa hosted training camps for white and black soldiers, as well as African-American officers. Camp Dodge, north of Des Moines, trained tens of thousands of black and white soldiers during the war. Black officers received training at Fort Des Moines, the only such facility in the country. It was set up here because Iowa had a more progressive racial attitude than many parts of the country and than anywhere in the South. In October 1917, the first class of 639 officers graduated. They served with the 92nd Division of France. One of them is James B. Morris. I don't know if you can be seen in that photo, but you get some idea of the number of black officers trained. In France, he wrote, "Black soldiers were fighting another man's war for the freedom we might never experience." He was badly wounded in November 1918, just as the war was coming to an end. He returned to Des Moines after the war and became a lawyer. He found a resurgent KKK. The Klan surged in popularity in the 1920s in response to the social and cultural changes of the 1910s and 1920s. The Klan had begun after the Civil War. Its goal was to enforce white supremacy in the South, control the lives